This is the Slots and Sockets Podcast, episode number 10. The PlayStation 5 is launching. I'm one of your hosts, IRD Moose.
I'm Turbo Penguin with FN2187.
Welcome,
AKA
FN2187, our micro host. And we got a few good stories coming up, but to kick it off, let's get started with our driver updates. What do we got tonight, Turbo?
Drivers. New driver for Intel Arc. Other than that, nothing new since last time we spoke. So all 9 of you, because apparently Moose has moved over to Arc, there is new Intel Arc drivers, and you should get them. Maybe they'll make your Doom 1 go better.
Yeah, be good to have more frames in Doom 1. So,
and speaking of older games, let's talk about PlayStation 5.
Yeah.
Because Sony is going to release, they have a placeholder for the technical presentation for September 10th at 8 a.m. Pacific time. And this is going to be them finally saying, yes, the PlayStation 5 Pro is a thing and it's going to release and everyone's going to be excited. I think the big thing for us from a gaming perspective is first, we have a new one, a new console. But 2, this is going to be the RDNA 3.5. So this is going to be RDNA 3. So roughly 7,000 series tech. And then add in ray tracing and some virtualization from an AI upscaling. As they try to kind of get some more beef into the PlayStation 5 as more of a refresh. I think in general it looks really, really positive. And, for gamers out there, I think it's awesome.
And it's interesting too, because they're sticking with Zen 2 for the CPU cores, but going with kind of a mix of Zen or of RDNA 3 and 4 for the GPUs. So that tells me that they're pretty confident in the CPU performance there.
Yeah, and I think the notion is that with the PlayStation, I think that they've got internal numbers that show that really the graphics is the bottleneck more than anything else.
Yeah.
So with the graphics being the bottleneck, it's going to add some features. It's going to add some speed. I think the notion is they're trying to get, 4K 60 with some new additional features. It'll be interesting to see if it really plays a whole lot different. I do not own a PlayStation or an Xbox, so I will not be one to try this out. But it'll be interesting to see from a reviews perspective if people are saying this is a wildly different or if it's more maybe a little bit better than the same. But the other thing that's really interesting on the PlayStation 5 is that AMD is not going to have any competition like they've had in prior launches where they're launching Xbox and PlayStation at the same time. So really, this is going to be how good is the PlayStation 5 and how well is it going to sell? Because Xbox and Microsoft don't have anything coming out, which kind of makes sense. They really kind of were, I think, maybe gearing up for the next version more than anything else. And it'll be interesting if this sells really well. Could we see a pro version or an AI version? I'm surprised it's not like PlayStation 5 AI, right? Because everything's AI now.
Yeah.
But
if it doesn't have AI in it, is it really a computer anymore? But yeah, I mean, it's one of the things I've seen, because the last console I had was a PlayStation 3. I mean, you can kind of see it sitting behind me in the shelf there under a Star Wars Risk box. And, I haven't played consoles, but a lot of the people I know that do play with PlayStation 5 now have complained that some of the newer games tend to hit performance bottlenecks where you can visually see the quality degrading while it struggles to maintain frame rate.
And we see that also with Xbox on the Lite version.
Yeah.
And there's some pushback that we've seen from developers not wanting to necessarily develop for the Lite version because it really is enough slower that it's hard to kind of keep that going. But enough talking of these silly consoles. Let's talk about really fun stuff like,
Yeah.
CPUs and graphics cards.
Well, on sticking with AMD kind of as the primary vendor there, it looks like the X870 board listings are starting to pop up from retailers, and they seem to be hinting at a launch around September 30th.
Yeah, again, I think this is probably correct. We'll probably have the 870 in the 870E. The Extreme is going to be for more half consumer, but more AI focused, lots of PCI Express lanes on
Yep.
that. Really expensive, by the way. The 870Es are, I'm guessing, upwards of it's starting at 600. X870 is probably going to be in the 299 plus range. Um, and so we're going to start, we've started seeing some photos, some unboxing images of some of these boards. We'll continue seeing that, especially as we get closer. I think the loaded question will be, is there a huge difference in performance on the 9000 series between the 670 versus the 870? Will there really be a difference? In past years, not really. Really, I believe 870 is probably going to come down to features. But I think the notion is to understand what features you're getting with that chipset, because the 870 is going to have more, USB 4.0s and those types of things. For gamers, I'm sure there are people out there who will utilize that stuff. It's just the question is cost versus utilization. I think the vast majority are going to be fine with a B series board, but you'll have plenty of people who just want the best of the best and build a machine that's just absolutely overkill. And that's such, you're going to be looking at the 870E.
Yeah,
Um,
because typically the B650 and well for this line the B850 version is going to be the one that's kind of the sweet spot for the majority of people. And then you really only are going to want to move up to the 870 and potentially the 870E unless you have a specific requirement, which, the 870E is definitely kind of the lower end of the prosumer line right before you consider going up to say a full-blown workstation board or something along those lines. So, I think most of us are probably going to be looking at the B series rather than the X series, just because the features really don't benefit a whole lot.
no, I think the loaded question I think people need to be looking at is PCI Express lanes and the support for M.2. Because I think that's the longevity play that you're going to have here is how many PCI Express. Because now that you don't have multi GPU, the question is, okay, how if my you know 9800 XTX in a year and a half or whatever it is, that uses 16, how many M.2s can I put in? And that's going to be a limiting piece is going to be there. That was the big selling point was the Gen 4 on AM4. So we'll see some of that trickle down into AM5. I think we're already starting to see, like, for instance, like X870 has to support USB 4.
Yep.
And I think, AMD's trying to really hard to kind of differentiate between that generation and the 870, the 670. So just understand what you're getting or what you're foregoing. I would expect to see a B860 or a B850 from AMD probably sometime maybe next year. It's pretty common for them to do that, so just keep an eye out for those. Um, and the other thing I would say is for the motherboard manufacturers is just keep a hint that we're starting to see some changes in who's got the best BIOSes. And so do a little bit of research on that piece to understand who's got really some good stuff, because there are some non-traditional, or I wouldn't say non-traditional, but some motherboard manufacturers that have done some pretty good things that kind of surprised me that maybe open up the ability to do some other things.
Right. Yeah. Well,
Continuing on Intel, India. Let's talk about Indians.
Yeah, they're doing some interesting things. Apparently, their retailers aren't ordering 13900Ks anymore. There's really not been any statement from any of the retailers that we can see, but it seems like they're either not ordering the parts or they're
They
not
can't.
getting the parts because they can't, because Intel is dwindling stock because of the RMAs for all the 13900Ks.
I'm surprised that Intel still allows these things to be sold. 13900K and 14, any 13th and 14th, because the problem that you get from Intel's perspective, if I'm selling these products, and I know that there are some performance and RMA issues, are you really just selling something to replace it later?
Right.
And I think that's a loaded question, is to see, if I were Intel and I've got some CPUs that are really close to come out, maybe I just start saying, you know what, just send me everything back. We're going to buy it back and we're going to make it whole when we get you the next, the 200K and V series um, out. That would help
Yeah.
them with stock of, for RMAs. I think that would be smart. Um, I don't know if Intel's necessarily, you know, that let's just pull everything back, because that would be again admitting that maybe they were wrong. But there's for sure, I mean, we've seen multiple instances where stock has been an issue. People who are trying to get these replacement parts are being told from Intel that they don't have stock and to wait 3 weeks, 4 weeks plus to get a replacement stock.
Yep. Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, I I I really don't see a whole lot of problem with Intel keeping the 13900Ks and the 14900Ks on the shelves if the problem isn't with the CPU itself. The concern there is we haven't seen any evidence that it's not the silicon that's the problem. Because we've heard some people saying that, oh, yeah, we applied the new patch and they're still dying. So,
We're not only that,
you
but I
know,
think that there's enough investigations that are going through. Even I think internal to Intel, even after the 129 microcode, you have people who are in the BIOS is seeing these voltages hit 1.5 still. And if the voltage is the problem, Intel, you have a problem when your CPUs are still volting that high.
yep,
And so if you're volting that high, if your voltage is bumping that high, and you're saying that's the root cause, are we just not doing the exact same thing? And, is this the band-aid fix that everyone more or less thinks? I had to give it, I think that this is a band-aid fix, and I do not think that this is going to end well. In 9 months, a year and a half, 2 years, when all of these when we start getting subpoenas and we realize how bad this problem is, are we going to look back at Intel and be like, so there was no way to fix these chips, yet you continue to sell them?
right.
And, uh,
That's not
you
going
know,
to look good in court.
it's not. So,
uh, but on that note, do you think they've really fixed the issue with the 200Ks that are coming out? Because we've got price leaks there too.
okay, so if I'm looking at this right, the leak is 566 pounds or euros, right?
Yep, pounds. It's
Pounds, British
566
pounds.
pounds for the i9.
Okay, so
I'm
the
sorry, the Core
i9
9. I, you
Core
know,
9,
it, I'm not going to
250
use the new naming.
85,
I'm going to call
the
them
voltage,
i9s. It's just too long.
i9 voltage
The
edition.
Well,
Um,
this one's the K, but yeah, the 285KF is listed for 566 pounds boxed.
okay,
Um, and they also missed the opportunity to call this a second gen 286.
because the 286 actually worked.
Ooh, oh,
Um,
burn.
here's my question. Um, okay, 566 pounds. that translates to $740 US.
Hmm.
Do they think that people are going to buy an Intel processor for $750?
In the UK, maybe. I'm going to expect that that price, when it hits the US dollar, is going to be a fair bit cheaper. It's probably
They,
going to be in the 599 range. It's going to have to be to compete with AMD's offerings if they
uh,
want to compete.
well, I think right now Intel is going to have cheaper processors because there's a risk that, and I think there's enough people that are um, listening that are looking at this saying $740 for me to try the next and be a guinea pig for the next gen CPUs.
Hmm.
A hard pass. I mean, I'm there's no way you're going to get me to sign up for that. I
Yeah.
mean, I hear all the horror stories. No way.
Yeah.
Um,
Seriously.
if it really is that expensive, holy crap buckets. Maybe maybe consumers. I mean, customers like business consumers, but even then, a lot of those have been burned and they've moved off. Um, if it's really that expensive, I start to really question if Intel can sell them without
I
heavy
have the same
discount.
question. Right. Yeah. I'm actually in the same boat with you there. But it's one of those things of, do you want to buy a $700 Intel CPU that might croak on you in a year or two because it's running too hot on the ring bus, or do you want to go with an AMD that's just as fast, if not faster, in some applications, is 100, maybe $200 cheaper, and that'll run 24/7 at stock speeds for 10 years without any issue.
I think the loaded question and how I view this is I almost feel like I'm a beta tester
Yeah.
for this next gen. And I think enough people are like, if this was a $750 processor and they were selling it for like $499 and they're like, this is the best thing and we're going to give such a long warranty on these things, then maybe there's an opportunity to be there. The problem is, I think that they can't afford to lose that much money on these processors.
Yep.
And we know that this is not a cheap node to set up and to build out. The silicon's going to be expensive. So is this going to be where the 285K is $750 US and it's going to be competing with a $499 processor? And
Yeah.
when X3D comes out, it might be a 559 versus a 750. And it almost needs to be, you need to switch those pricing. So we'll see what that looks like. I think people should look, I'd be leery.
Yeah.
I absolutely am, but we'll
I'm
see.
personally, I'm going to avoid recommending Intel at least until we have solid proof that the issue is resolved. And speaking of solid proof, I have a bit of a correction to make, and I apologize to all of our three listeners who heard me say that Intel's not even using EUV yet. They actually do have EUV in their Oregon fab, and they are currently testing the next generation high NA EUV at that same fab, getting ready for 14A. So they're not using high NA EUV, but I believe they are using it, at least EUV, for the current gen parts. And that could potentially be related to where some of the issues come from. Because when Intel has big process changes like this, um, going from DUV to EUV, sometimes they have trouble. I don't know if it's related or not, but,
What
time will tell.
was it? The 200 was the 200 series the one that's being made by TSMC?
I believe so, and TSMC is making those, from my understanding, in their EUV fab.
Yeah. And the only thing that Intel Fab is doing is the end packaging. So they're doing TSMC is doing all of the good happy stuff. And it's the Intel Fab that are more or less just like putting the outside wax on it so they can say they used it.
Yep.
But that's not good when Intel's not using their own fabs to do things. So
Right. Well,
Anyways,
they canceled 20A because of fab issues because they couldn't get 20A stable,
yep.
and they're moving forward to 18A. So, and they're several years out from 14A, which they're bringing online now. So, you never know how these things are going to shake out until you actually etch some silicon. So, moving forward into GPU territory, looks like NVIDIA just recently released DLSS 3.5 into Star Wars Outlaws of all things.
Yeah, I think this is probably more just to get some real DLSS 3.5 out there. Um, we'll probably see some DLSS 3.5, into some current games that have, some lifespan left. It's my understanding that's more of a drag and drop as far as here's to three, here's 3.5. It is an increase and it's a buff. Um, I think this might be somewhat of a response to frame gen that actually works pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for those who are an RTX card, and you use DLSS, this is going to be some improvement. I think we're limited because we only see it in one game, and it's a heavily NVIDIA coded game. So the loaded question will be, how do we see it across multiple games? But I don't think anyone's expecting this to be bad. I think this is always a positive thing.
Yeah.
Could this give some more life to some, 2060, 2070, 2080 users as they kind of get this long? Yes. It really is, I think, going to help really the 3000 series and higher. More than anything else, keep in mind that there was a difference between the RTX 2 and the RTX 3000 series,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to RT cores. So there is a bump in those. So really, it's going to be focused and see more performance on the 3000 series.
Yep.
Um, and then, okay, so we've seen this a couple of times, where GDDR6X is become a little bit more hard to find. And so, in the notion that they still want to sell graphics cards, NVIDIA endorsed GDDR6 non-X models to come out,
Mm-hmm.
and the old models are cheaper. So,
Yeah, that's the weird thing. The new card with hypothetically slower memory is more expensive. The interesting thing is with this play is AMD is still using GDDR6, not 6X in the 8000 series,
power.
but they're pulling the bandwidth out of it. So maybe it could be a power play. It could just be that, hey, we got some additional refinements on 6 and now it's competitive enough with 6X and the process is done where they can just crank out wafers of 6 faster than they can 6X. So, who knows? There's a lot of variables in that aspect that can contribute to the price, but it is kind of weird that a theoretically slower spec card in some cases turns out to be more expensive than the faster card.
Well, I also think if right now 6X is still trying to come back, where you start having volumes again like they did,
Mm-hmm.
and if you don't have the volumes, then you start saying, okay, well, I want to sell cards. What I'm surprised is that they're still making 4070 parts, 4,000 series parts. Not like graphics cards are flying off the shelf right now. I would
Yeah.
have thought that maybe they would have maybe moved a lot of this production over to Blackwell to get ready for that launch. And that's just not the case. So that might be a telling sign that we're going to see um, more of a paper launch from the 5000 series than a
Mm-hmm.
physical launch. And yeah,
You mean
it'll
like
be
Intel's
interesting to
been
see what
paper
the
launching?
Intel has had a lot of paper launches. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and another one that just leaked, moving over to AMD, is they've announced their UDNA GPU, which is supposed to be a fusion of RDNA and their commercial line CDNA. I think they're
Uh,
going. I think they're getting ready to go after the high end, but they're still chasing the middle.
um, I think this makes a lot of sense, because if you look at what you've got one set of instructions that work on both. That makes a lot of sense to streamline it. And I think if you've got a bunch of these that are on the UDNA setup, it works on both. I think you're going to have cross-platform. I think they look at CUDA and be like, that was probably a really good idea. The fact that we split ours probably wasn't such a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other half, I will say, and the real question, and one we haven't really heard with UDNA is UDNA something that's going to get used or that gets picked up with PlayStation 5 Pro or Xbox? If it's really universal, that could be a very interesting play where you could have some of these cores allow you to do some things. I believe that's probably where a lot of early adopters of 6,000 and 7,000 series were looking at PlayStation and Xbox and saying, hey, it's the same, Navi, whatever it is, it's the same generation that's in those. When they find performance uplifts, it's something that could transfer and trickle down to us. And that really hasn't happened. Um, I think if you get some UTNA on those, that could be, again, a really good thing because of how many units are out in the wild for PlayStation and Xbox.
Yeah.
So I do believe the play here on the UDNA is to try to get as much of my programming out to as many people that want to try this stuff, and rather than trying to split it up and say you have to buy a commercial piece and you have to buy a residential and you two can't talk to each other.
Right. Yeah, and
Yeah,
and the
all
other
the
thing
damn that.
too is the CDNA cores seem to have much better ray tracing performance too, but not so good on the rasterization. And they're also, from my understanding, granted, because I'm not really heavily into that market, those cards tend to be more of the workstation graphics cards that you use for doing AI acceleration and GPU stuff. And that's where AMD's consumer line has always or traditionally kind of fallen flat. There was a period a few years ago where, yeah, there was some pretty heavy mining going on AMD cards, but the vast majority of that stuff has been handled by Nvidia, which is why CUDA took off so easily because, the excited teenager who gets his hands on a 1070 becomes the CUDA developer when the 40 series comes out, you know.
Yeah. I think it makes a lot of sense. Now, the loaded question I think will be, do you have people who are saying, well, I don't want to pay, commercial pricing, and they start buying up a bunch of 8,000 series graphics cards to be able to enable it. I think that's part of what we saw with NVIDIA. They said, oh, wow, we can do this. It's the same thing. It's on the CUDA. And I don't have to necessarily have the $5,000 graphics card. I could get this $2,500 4090. And some of that is now the loaded question is, AI bust, how long that bubble lasts and all of those stuff. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yep.
I don't think it's bad. I think the jury's out to figure out what that looks like. So
Well, and
last
and
thing,
seeing those come into the mid market too is really going to be where it opens it up to pretty much anybody being able to develop for it because you can get it for your home system and start playing with it.
yeah,
And that kind of leads into our last topic about
yep,
AMD chasing the mid market. So, they actually officially confirmed it, and yeah, there's not going to be a X900 series card for this generation. Potentially not for the next generation. I kind of have the feeling that this UDNA move is probably going to be in the 9000 series parts, and we might see the return of the 9900 XT, or it could be a 10900 XT. Who knows?
we're not quite sure. I mean, UDNA was just dropped, and I don't, it's a software piece. I don't think really anyone had, a ton of advance notice on that. I think everyone from the outside looking in says, yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, the middle market and the that the average gamer, 40, 80 and below, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
They want a lot of volume in those cards, and I think that they want to be able to go to developers and say, "Hey, we have this UDNA thing, and we have all of this new market, and now we can do ray tracing." And I think that that's what they sit there and say. That's what we're missing.
Yeah.
It's very clear that that's how they go towards that. Now, I see some comments out there of people who are saying, "Hey, but you're missing that really high end skew and how it affects the other lower lines." Um, all I can say onto this is if you give people a good value proposition of frames versus price, and allows you to do the same things like ray tracing, um, I still think it's going to sell well. I do expect our UGNA 4, I guess that's what we're calling it now, is going to sell very well. I think it's going to be really, really popular. If you have a 4090, are you going to sell it to go get one of these? No. Um, will a 7900 XTX or a 7900 XT user sell that and to come in? If ray tracing is your thing, then yes, maybe you'll see some of those, but I don't think the vast majority of those users are. Will people who are running a 6700 XT be jumping into these? Absolutely. Will people who want some RAM and want not to have to pay out of it, out the rear end like they do with NVIDIA do that? Yeah. Um, this should be a fairly well received, and gamers across the internet topia should be so happy, because if this price drops where we think it's going to drop, it's going to be a step in the direction that everyone wants, which is cheaper GPUs.
Yep. And cheaper GPUs is always going to be good news.
Always, always good news. As long as they can play Doom 1.
Exactly. Can it run Crisis? Yeah, that's the old meme.
Oh my
So
gosh.
one last bonus story I kind of want to toss in there and give some big props to Roman slash Derbauer of Thermal Grizzly. He had an issue with his direct die CPU coolers recently, and he did exactly the right thing. As soon as he found out there was an issue with his coolers, turns out that the nickel plating was sized incorrectly and it was causing traces on the package of Intel CPUs to get cut. Um, Not only did he recall those coolers and ship replacements, he shipped upgraded replacements. He sent replacement coolers with embedded RGB. And as we all know, more shiny is more good, especially when it's coming from somebody like Derbauer. So good on you, and good job, Thermal Grizzly. You guys get thumbs up from both of us. And with that final topic, I want to thank all of you for watching. Remember to like and comment, subscribe, do all the algorithm goodness things down in the doobly-doo down there. And, boost us in the algorithm if you like what you're seeing. Tell us what you don't like and things you'd like us to cover in future episodes. And until next time, thank you, everybody. Have fun storming the castle.
Or racing that car. Good night, everybody.
Good night.